Everyone assumes I shattered Marcus with that ultimatum, that I'm some cruel architect who presented him an impossible choice and smirked when he fled. What they don't grasp is that I choreographed every moment leading to that sentence, every breadcrumb of betrayal, every paper cut in our shared life. I can't pretend I'm proud. I'm sickened by my own capacity for manipulation. But you must understand what truly hung in the balance, not merely our 5-year partnership, but his entire foundation, the sanctuary we'd built in that rent-controlled Brooklyn walk-up, my reputation in the academic world. My greatest terror wasn't his departure, it was his compliance, that he'd stifle his dignity and stay. I vowed that if he embraced my conditions, I'd confess the entire performance. Instead, he selected the exit I'd engineered. I met Marcus at a colleague's gallery opening during my 3rd doctoral year. He stood near a white wall, gripping a plastic cup of Merlot, radiating that masculine boredom men perform when determined to appear unimpressed. That morning, my advisor had dismissed my dissertation proposal as derivative. I was 32, subsisting on adjunct wages, starving for acknowledgement. Marcus worked in fintech, wore cashmere without self-consciousness, and possessed the rare gift of asking questions that made you feel luminous. When he touched my lower back 3 weeks later, steering me through a museum crowd, I registered the click of something aligning. We moved into his apartment 8 months later. The place had central air and a dishwasher, mundane luxuries that felt miraculous after years of graduate housing. Our domesticity developed its own rhythm. He brewed coffee exactly how I preferred, though he drank espresso. I untangled his work emails when his dyslexia nodded the syntax. We negotiated thermostat wars and chore rotation. Standard relationship arithmetic. His mother mailed us matching pajamas for Christmas. I feigned enthusiasm for the hideous plaid pattern. I initiated therapy that winter, nominally for dissertation anxiety. Dr. Chen transformed silences into interrogations. During our 3rd session, she probed my intimacy patterns. I laughed and called them layered. In truth, fidelity had always eluded me, but I was determined to rewrite my narrative with Marcus. This would be my redemption arc. The initial fracture appeared when I accepted a research fellowship requiring conference travel. Marcus offered verbal support, but I felt his shoulders tight when I mentioned Seattle in 3 weeks. Just 72 hours, I said, pouring his favorite scotch. He accepted the glass without meeting my eyes. You might not even register my absence, I added. The line felt rehearsed, a script from a film I'd memorized. That moment, those words marked my first genuine deception. I saved David's contact as Dr. Chen knew office, convinced I was managing a controlled burn. The dramatic irony tasted like power. I believed I was directing my own catastrophe. Seattle materialized with manufactured excitement. I texted David from the conference hotel, building a digital trail of flirtation and connection. Each message was a brick in the bridge I was constructing toward self-destruction. At the hotel bar, I positioned myself where colleagues might photograph me with a mystery man. I ordered David a drink when he arrived, making sure the bartender heard me use his name. Back home, Marcus's texts grew increasingly sparse. He asked about my days, but his questions had sharp edges. I responded with photographs of conference materials, careful to include timestamps. The performance required constant vigilance. I created a second email account to fabricate correspondence, writing passionate messages to myself that I later showed David during our clandestine meetings. I was directing a play in which I was both protagonist and audience. Dr. Chen noticed the fragmentation during our sessions. You seem preoccupied, she observed. I laughed and blamed the conference circuit, the pressure to publish, the usual academic mortality. I never mentioned David, though his name burned behind my teeth. I was becoming a woman who lived in parallel worlds, and the separation was starting to exhaust me. The first real consequence came when Marcus called me at midnight, his voice slurred with whiskey. Who are you? He asked. Not who is he, but who are you? The question cut deeper than any accusation. I lied smoothly, told him I was his partner, the same woman he'd loved for 5 years. But we both knew I was disappearing, replacing myself with someone who could justify anything. The emotional whiplash was immediate. I'd wanted to be seen, but this was too much visibility. Sarah intervened during a brunch I'd almost canceled. Marcus is falling apart, she whispered while he was in the bathroom. He's checking your location, questioning your entire history. Whatever this is, it's cannibalizing him. I squeezed her hand and promised it was a phase, that we were working through it. The lie tasted metallic, like blood from a bitten cheek. I was so deep in the performance I'd forgotten the exit strategy. The rationalizations became my native language. I told myself I was giving Marcus freedom from a relationship that had become my prison. I convinced myself David was a necessary catalyst, a way to make the ending clean. I wasn't cheating, I was setting him free. I wasn't lying, I was protecting him from a truth too monstrous to name. Each justification was a thread in the noose I was braiding for myself. The defensive justification became reflexive, a way to silence the voice that whispered I was simply afraid. I began documenting my own behavior in a journal, cataloging each lie, not as repentance, but as evidence. I was building a case for my own prosecution, and the verdict was predetermined. Denver arrived 3 months later, snow-dusted and bright with deception. I orchestrated the weekend like a heist film, booking a hotel room with a minibar I couldn't afford and a view of the mountains I didn't notice. David and I had graduated from fabricated emotional intimacy to physical performance. I kissed him in the hotel elevator, knowing the security camera would timestamp our embrace. I left lingerie in his room, then photographed it, creating a receipt for infidelity I could later accidentally display. Marcus met me at the airport, his face a mask of careful neutrality. He'd started therapy too, though he didn't share the details. He asked about my trip, and I delivered a performance of exhausted scholarship, omitting David's name with practiced ease. But Marcus's eyes kept drifting to my phone, to the way my fingers hovered protectively over the screen. He knew something had calcified between us, a secret that had grown too large to hide. The truth bomb detonated on a Tuesday evening. Marcus was working late, and I was grading papers in our living room when his iPad pinged with a notification. It was an email I'd forgotten to redirect, a message from David that I'd forwarded to my dummy account, which still synced to the tablet. Marcus picked it up, read the message, then clicked through the thread. I watched the color drain from his face in real time, each word a poisoned dart. "Who is David?" he asked, his voice quiet enough to be dangerous. I started to speak, to deploy the explanation I'd rehearsed, but he held up a hand. "No more performances, no more lies, just tell me." For a moment, I considered confession. I could tell him about the diagnosis I'd received weeks earlier, about the genetic time bomb my mother had passed down, about the MRI showing early plaques forming in my temporal lobe. I could explain that David was never real, that I'd paid an escort to play the role, that every message was written by me. But I looked at Marcus's face, at the exhaustion carved around his eyes, and I couldn't transfer my burden onto his shoulders. So I lied again. "He's someone who sees me," I said. "And I need that, even if it's wrong. I need to be allowed this, or I need to leave." The social validation gap yawned between us. Publicly I was a cheater, privately I was a woman dying alone. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, walked to our bedroom, and began packing a suitcase. He didn't cry or yell. He moved with mechanical precision, folding shirts I'd bought him, placing books I'd gifted him into a box. The silence was worse than any confrontation. I sat on the couch, frozen, watching him dismantle our life with quiet efficiency. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by a text from Marcus I didn't see. She stood in the doorway, looking between us, her face a mixture of fury and pity. "What did you do?" she asked. I opened my mouth, but Marcus spoke first. "She gave me a choice," he said, his voice flat. "I made it." The consequence escalation was complete. Our social circle would fracture along the fault lines of this moment. He walked out with one suitcase, leaving behind a closet half full of clothes, a bookshelf with gaps I couldn't look at, and the lingering scent of his cedarwood cologne. Sarah stayed for 10 minutes, berating me with questions I couldn't answer. I let her fury wash over me, a penance I deserved. When she left, slamming the door, I opened my laptop and began deleting evidence, not of an affair, but of the theater I'd constructed. But I saved one thing, a folder marked medical records that contained my mother's autopsy report and my own recent scans. I told myself I might need them someday if I ever found the courage to tell the truth. The breadcrumb was dropped. Future discovery might reveal the real story. The immediate aftermath was a vacuum of sound. Our apartment became a mausoleum of abandoned objects, his coffee mug in the cabinet, his running shoes by the door, the half-empty bottle of scotch on the counter. I moved through the space like a ghost, haunting my own life. Friends divided into factions with algorithmic precision. The couples we knew closed ranks around Marcus, offering him their guest rooms and shoulders. My department colleagues maintained a polite distance, inviting me to meetings but not dinner. I began documenting my cognitive lapses in a journal I kept beside the bed. First came the small absences, forgetting appointments, misplacing my keys, staring at my lecture notes unable to recognize my own handwriting. Then the larger disappearances: I showed up to teach a class I'd canceled, called students by the wrong names, graded papers I'd already returned. The dramatic irony built: readers see the signs, but I was still performing. Dr. Chen referred me to a neurologist after I missed 3 consecutive appointments. The social fallout expanded. Marcus and I had shared a digital life, Instagram photos, Facebook tags, a joint calendar that now showed only my events. I began untagging myself from old photos, not out of malice, but because seeing our happy faces felt like looking at strangers. His mother unfriended me, then sent a formal letter requesting return of a family heirloom she'd gifted me. I packaged the silver necklace and mailed it without a note. I attempted to confess to Sarah, dialing her number before losing courage and hanging up. I typed long emails explaining everything: the diagnosis, the fake affair, the ultimatum as a mercy, then deleted them. How could I explain that I'd driven away the man I loved to spare him watching me vanish? The logic felt circular, a snake eating its own tail. Instead, I posted cryptic quotes about mental health on Twitter, hoping someone would ask if I was okay. No one did. David texted me twice after Marcus left, confused by my sudden silence. I blocked his number without responding. The real affair had been brief, unsatisfying, a plot device rather than a passion. I'd needed evidence of infidelity, not a lover. I'd chosen David because he was convenient, similarly lonely, willing to believe my marriage was already dead. When I'd paid him for our final night together, a transaction that made me feel both powerful and pathetic, he'd kissed my forehead and said, "I hope you get what you need." I had, just not in the way he imagined. The failed attempt to make things right came during Marcus's birthday. I sent him a package containing his favorite book, a first edition I'd hunted for months, and a letter that explained everything in clinical detail: my mother's diagnosis at 52, my own genetic testing, the first signs of cognitive decline I'd noticed during conference season. The recontextualization was there. If only he'd read it, everything would shift. He returned the package unopened with a note that contained 5 words: "I hope you find peace." The rejection was surgical, precise. He'd chosen not to carry my truth, and I couldn't blame him. I designed the exit to be one way. I'd never planned for how it would feel to be the one left behind, holding the weight of a secret that had already served its purpose. I began losing vocabulary next. I'd stand at my classroom podium, staring at terms I'd used for years: hegemony, praxis, dialectic, and see only nonsense symbols. My department chair called me into his office, concerned about my teaching evaluations. I wanted to tell him I was dying by degrees, but instead I blamed the stress of the separation. I took a leave of absence, citing personal reasons. The truth was I could no longer trust myself to form coherent lectures. The apartment felt smaller with only my memory lapses for company. I donated Marcus's remaining clothes to Goodwill, keeping only one sweater that still carried his scent. I slept with it pressed against my face, breathing him in like a drug. I wasn't just losing my mind, I was losing the story of us, the narrative I'd tried to preserve by destroying it. The situation spiraled in an unexpected way. My plan had worked, but I was unraveling faster than anticipated. The final secret I'd been hiding was this: Marcus had known something was wrong months before the confrontation. He found my mother's medical files while searching for a tax document. He'd noticed the tremor in my hands, the way I repeated questions. He'd noticed the appointments I tried to hide. He'd stayed silent, hoping I'd trust him enough to share. When I created the affair instead, he understood my choice. That's why he left without rage. He saw the performance for what it was, a gift wrapped in barbed wire, and he honored my terrible logic by accepting it. The breaking point extended across 4 months, each day a micro-performance of normalcy I could barely sustain. I woke at 6, made coffee I sometimes forgot to drink, graded papers through a fog of confusion, and answered concerned emails from colleagues with cheerful lies. Publicly, I was a woman adjusting to single life. Privately, I was a synapse misfiring, a brain turning against itself. My self-sabotage took on ritualistic qualities. I'd leave my phone unlocked where students might see the medical appointment reminders. I'd forget to close my laptop, letting the browser history show my search's early onset dementia timeline. How fast does Alzheimer's progress? Caring for spouse with cognitive decline. I was leaving breadcrumbs for a mystery no one was solving, hoping someone would connect the dots and absolve me of my own silence. This was my worst decision, yet creating a puzzle no one was solving. The near confession happened during a dinner with my father. He visited from Florida, concerned about my leave of absence. We sat in an Italian restaurant where the candles flickered like dying synapses. He asked about Marcus, and I felt the truth rise in my throat, a confession about the diagnosis, the fake affair, the ultimate cowardice. Instead I said, we grew apart. He wanted different things. My father nodded, accepting the lie, and I watched him age a decade in that moment, his own wife lost to the same disease I was hiding. My support system crumbled as my cognition deteriorated. Dr. Chen terminated our sessions, citing my missed appointments. She sent a referral to a psychiatrist who specialized in neurodegenerative conditions, but I never called. What was the point? Therapists treat the living, not the walking dead. My students stopped emailing, assuming I'd abandoned them. Even my father, after that dinner, began communicating through brief texts rather than phone calls. I was becoming a person people managed rather than engaged with. The confrontation I'd orchestrated came during a final meeting with my department advisor. She called me in to discuss my future, concerned about my ability to return to teaching. I sat across from her, watching her mouth move, comprehending individual words but losing the thread of meaning. She asked if I needed help, if there was something I wasn't telling her. I wanted to laugh. There was everything I wasn't telling her. I'm fine, I said, the biggest lie of all. Just adjusting to new medication. She looked at me with professional pity, the kind that knows it's being fed a story but accepts the currency. I left her office with a formal leave of absence and an unofficial death sentence on my career. My support system had officially crumbled. The emotional peak came during a moment of perfect clarity at 3 a.m. I woke remembering Marcus's face with crystalline precision, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the exact temperature of his hand on my back. For a brief, cruel hour, I was fully present, fully aware of what I'd done. I composed a final email to him, one I actually sent, writing with all the eloquence I could muster, I forgive you for leaving, but I need you to know you were loved. You were loved enough to become the excuse for my own destruction. The direct question I had to deflect came from my father's wife, who called after he'd confided his worries. What's really happening? She demanded. He says you're fine, but you're not fine. No one goes through a divorce and leaves their job for no reason. I considered telling her, leveraging her against my own silence. Instead I said, I'm processing trauma in my own way, please respect my privacy. The deflection worked. She apologized and hung up, and I was once again alone with my terrible, necessary secret. In the final stage before the worst revelation, I became my own caretaker, setting up systems I'd soon be too impaired to navigate. I arranged for automatic bill payments, scheduled grocery deliveries, programmed reminders for medication I sometimes forgot to take. Each system was an acknowledgement that I was building a cage for a future self who wouldn't understand why she'd built it. The irony was exquisite. I was engineering my own assisted living, alone, because I'd driven away the only person who might have helped. The worst truth, the one I'd promised myself I'd reveal if Marcus had chosen differently, is this: David never existed. Not as a lover, not as a confidant, not as anything beyond a role I paid a struggling actor to perform. I found him through a service that provides emergency boyfriends for social events, and I hired him for a 6-month engagement. Every text, every email, every intimate confession I allegedly shared with David was written by me to myself, then carefully staged for discovery. The full confession begins with my mother's death, which was not a sudden tragedy but a prolonged disappearance. She was diagnosed at 52, the same age I am now, and she spent 7 years vanishing by degrees. My father cared for her until he was a hollow shell of himself, until the woman he loved no longer recognized his face. I watched this erosion and promised myself I would never inflict such a fate on someone I loved. When my own diagnosis came, when the genetic test confirmed I carried the same early-onset variant, I made a decision that seemed at the time merciful. The most damning detail is this: Marcus knew. Not about the fake affair, but about the diagnosis. He found my mother's medical files while searching for a tax document the previous spring. He'd noticed the tremor in my hands, the way I repeated questions, the appointments I tried to hide in our shared calendar. He'd stayed silent, hoping I'd trust him enough to share. When I created the affair instead, he understood my choice with heartbreaking clarity. That's why he left without rage. He saw the performance for what it was, a gift wrapped in barbed wire, and he honored my terrible logic by accepting it. The immediate fallout of this revelation is that I've been living in a solitude I designed but can't escape. The isolation that was supposed to be temporary, just until the disease progressed enough that I wouldn't care, has become permanent. Marcus didn't just leave, he disappeared completely, changing his number, moving to a new city, erasing his digital footprint. I hired a private investigator once, in a moment of weakness, and learned he'd moved to Portland, started a new relationship with someone who could give him a future. I paid the investigator extra to delete his findings, to spare myself the details. My justifications reached their peak defensiveness when I explained the plan to my reflection. I would stand before the bathroom mirror and deliver the speech I never gave Marcus. I am sparing you from becoming my caretaker, from watching me forget your name, from spending your 30s wiping my chin and explaining your own death to me daily. The reflection never responded, but I saw judgment in its eyes. I saw the cowardice dressed up as sacrifice. The truth changes everything because it reveals the ultimatum as the opposite of cruelty. It was the most loving act I could manage, a perverse kindness that ensured Marcus would never have to choose between his happiness and his conscience. I gave him a villain he could hate, instead of a disease he couldn't fight. I gave him freedom from a future of grief and obligation. I gave him everything by pretending to take it all away. The final hidden element is this: I am not writing this confession from a place of clarity. I am writing it because I found these documents open on my laptop, half composed, and I don't remember starting them. The gaps are winning. Soon I will forget why I did any of this. Soon I will forget Marcus entirely. And the cruelest part is that I will forget the beautiful, terrible gift I gave him, the sacrifice that cost me everything. I will become a woman without memory, without motive, without the burden of my own chivalry. The concrete fallout manifested in three distinct arenas: professional, social, and medical. Professionally, my department placed me on indefinite leave. My advisor wrote recommendations for positions I could no longer hold, her faith in my recovery touching and misplaced. I still received emails from students asking for letters of recommendation, each one a small resurrection of a person I used to be. I answered them automatically, my former self's ghost operating the keyboard. Socially, our friend group performed a binary fission. Marcus's allies closed ranks, posting photos of their new lives in Portland, a city I'd never visited but now associated with his happiness. My few remaining friends treated me like a bereaved widow, inviting me to low-key dinners where they avoided asking about my health or my ex. I became a taboo topic, a cautionary tale whispered about in other circles. At a faculty function, I overheard two junior professors discussing the woman who self-destructed so spectacularly her partner fled the state. I smiled and refilled my wine, offering no correction. The medical consequences were more intimate. My neurologist prescribed medication that slowed but couldn't stop the progression. I began requiring a home aide twice weekly, a kind woman named Rosa who called me dear and pretended not to notice when I repeated myself. My father increased his visits, each one a rehearsal for his future grief. He'd sit in my apartment, watching me forget entire conversations, and I'd see him calculating how long until I forgot him completely. The social media dimension added a surreal layer. I maintained an Instagram account where I posted photos of my new chapter, books I was reading, coffee I was drinking, sunsets I was witnessing alone. The captions were optimistic, resilient. Finding myself, read one. New beginnings, read another. The performance continued even when the audience had left. I was creating a digital ghost for myself to haunt after my consciousness evaporated. My internal state became a battleground between defensiveness and dawning awareness. Part of me still insisted I'd made the right choice, that Marcus was better off in Portland with his clean conscience and new girlfriend. Another part woke in the night, reaching for a man who wasn't there, wondering if he would have held my hand through the diagnosis after all. The cracks in my armor widened. I no longer knew if I'd been noble or simply afraid. The unexpected consequence I hadn't anticipated was memory regression. I began losing the most recent memories first, the affair, the ultimatum, Marcus's departure, but retaining older ones: our first date, the way he looked sleeping, the sound of his key in the door. I was rewinding through my own life, becoming the woman who'd loved him but not yet betrayed him. Some mornings I woke expecting to find him beside me, and the disappointment when I remembered was fresh and brutal, as if it had just happened. The moment of genuine self-awareness broke through during Rosa's visit. She was helping me organize my medications when she found the folder of medical records and fake affair evidence. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with eyes that understood too much. You built a maze to protect someone, she said, but you forgot to leave yourself an exit. I broke down then, sobbing in her arms like a child, all my careful justifications dissolving into simple grief. I wasn't a martyr. I was a woman who'd chosen loneliness over vulnerability, and the bill had come due. My current state is this: I can write this confession today, but tomorrow I may not remember composing it. I can picture Marcus's face with perfect clarity, but next week I might confuse him with my father. I am a sunset of consciousness, beautiful and brief and inevitably fading. The story I've told is one of manipulation and sacrifice, but the truth is simpler. I was terrified, and I chose the only path that allowed me to feel powerful in my powerlessness. I'm telling this story now because I found it open on my laptop, the cursor blinking at the end of a sentence I don't remember writing. I'm telling it because Rosa found the documents and asked if I wanted her to mail them somewhere, and I said yes. Send them to Portland, send them to Marcus, send them to the man who might finally understand. I'm telling it because my father called yesterday, and I asked him when Mom was coming home, and his silence told me I'm running out of time. This confession fulfills the promise I made to myself that night on the couch. I swore I'd reveal everything if Marcus chose to stay. He didn't, so I'm revealing it anyway, a decade too late to an audience of one. Maybe he'll read this and understand that the woman who broke his heart was already breaking in more profound ways. Maybe he'll forgive me, maybe he won't. The outcome is no longer mine to control. What I've learned is this: there is no noble way to abandon someone you love. My elaborate scheme, my fake affair, my manufactured ultimatum, they were all just Baroque forms of cowardice. I thought I was saving him from a future of pain, but I was really saving myself from the immediate discomfort of vulnerability. I was protecting my pride, not his future. The disease gave me an excuse to do what I'd always feared be truly known. The moral ambiguity remains intact. Was it better that he left? Would our love have survived the years of caretaking, the slow erasure of the woman he'd loved? I don't know. I'll never know. What I do know is that I stole from both of us the chance to find out. I stole his ability to choose, and I stole my own chance to be chosen, to be worth the difficult years. So judge me. Call me a coward, a manipulator, a woman who engineered her own isolation. You're not wrong. But know this: if I could remember this confession tomorrow, I would write the same thing. I would tell you that love sometimes takes the shape of destruction, that sacrifice can be indistinguishable from selfishness, that I gave him an ultimatum not because I wanted to leave, but because I was already leaving, neuron by neuron, memory by memory. He chose door number 2. And I am here, behind door number 1, waiting for the final lock to click shut.